me start with the first question. Why did you choose to be a doctor?
Well, there are many doctors in the family. My father and my grandfather on my mother's side and my uncle were all doctors. And so it's kind of three different versions. And even though my father was a relatively unhappy doctor and he never pressured me, I still like the idea of being a doctor. And yeah, so I really didn't have much question about that. I didn't flail around and think about many other things. I mean, when I was a little kid, I did have other things, but sort of later on, I was pretty focused on a career in medicine. My father had a friend who it seemed like would be a good person to advise me about getting into medical school. And this person didn't like my father very much, took one look at me and said I would never get into medical school for the following reasons. I didn't have perfect teeth, and medical schools don't take people who don't have perfect teeth, and I didn't know anyone. Didn't I know anyone? If I didn't know anyone, there's no way I'm going to get into medical school. So my father thought this advice was going to, encourage me. But actually, the very next week, I got accepted by my first medical school, so I didn't have to worry too much about the perfect teeth and stuff. I was going to be all right, and without knowing somebody inside. Yeah, so that. But I was very shy. And that changed around the end of my first year in medical school. I realized I was doing well, and somehow being shy and so quiet and doing well didn't seem to me to be compatible with each other. This came as a big surprise to my wife because previously we'd go to parties and she would do all the talking. So she became sort of an amateur expert on what medicine was and tell people what I was up to. So as I came out of my shyness, it kind of changed the dynamic. Now I was the person talking at the parties. So, but what it does mean is people who knew me in college knew me as somebody who spent a lot of time in the library and sort of was very not terribly active in terms of social life. There's another classmate of mine who flunked out at the end of first year, but he was such a party person. Everybody remembers him. And he and I, the only two members of our college class who have a Wikipedia page. So anyway, it's a strange sort of thing. Everybody remembers him, and I thought really nobody would remember me because I was so shy at that time. So I kind of evolved a lot. But for instance, in the course I teach on technology and the future of medicine, the undergraduates have to be interviewed, and so they tend to be charismatic, outgoing people who enjoy being interviewed. But we have provisions in there for the shy student, all sorts of ways that the shy student can enter the class, and if they don't want to do the final presentation live, they can do it just with a videographer, sort of similar to what we're doing now, and then present that to the class rather than speaking live and so on. And this kind of amusing shy student component of the course has been used many times by unshy students who still think it'd be cool to kind of try out the shy student part. So I guess that I have known both shy and unshy personas in my life.
Regrets?
Regrets? No, I really don't have any regrets. I think, in a way, my life has been all coming from certain points. Like you can take January 1973, when I was an intern in pathology at Johns Hopkins, and I did something absolutely unusual, getting 5 Oberlin College winter term students to start working with me. And that then continued the next 46 years, where I had undergraduate students as an important part of my research effort. And you could say, well, whose idea, who initiated that? How did that come about? And it wasn't all me. My boss at the time thought this was fascinating, and he encouraged me to keep on doing it. And so that was one of the reasons that I kept on employing students in the things that I do. So the other pivotal point was when I went to Singularity University. I've probably always had interest in futurism and the future, but I didn't have any real constructs to put that on until I took that 10-day executive course. And most courses of that length, you rapidly forget, and it's just a little blip in your well-being, and then it's over and it's like nothing happened. But it introduced me to so many people and new ideas and new ways of doing things. And I became really the only person within the medical academic world teaching about the point when in 2029 machines are smarter than individual humans, and then in 2045 when they're smarter than the whole aggregate human race. And the 3 other people teaching courses on that are all professional keynote speakers, so entirely different from my life. They get like $40,000 to $60,000 US per talk, but they don't have to be academically credible. They just have to be good entertainers. So I'm the only one teaching about this content who actually needs to be credible, consistent, logical in the whole world, as far as I can tell. I hope that someday that such courses will exist in every university, but at the moment there's really just those 4 places, and I'm the only one doing that as a full-time academic. So that began in spring of 2010, 9 years ago.
So we're speaking about teaching. Tell us something about your teachers.
So Robert Heptinstall was my mentor in pathology, and the story I told before about the students, he was the one who thought this was so fascinating and intriguing, getting young people, even though I was already very young, getting even younger people to help me with my research, and to regularly do that, like every year, every summer, and so on. So he encouraged that. He was very kind in other ways. I was fairly tall, and so I was like bending over to use the microscope, and he thought we should put something under the microscope as a microscope stand. And this also became a kind of tradition. So now, recently, the students created a photo collage on a microscope stand for me, and it's one of the most striking things you can see in the shared room that I share with the young people that I teach. I think I am the only senior academic in medicine sharing my office with the young people that I train between the ages of 15 and 33, and we have the best art and artifacts and cool stuff in the room. But how am I so sure I'm the only one? I think I'm one of the few people who would actually enjoy doing that. It would probably be a nightmare for most older people, the idea that they have to share their office with some young person, but because since January 1973, I've been consistently talking with young people all that time, so it is for me the natural way of work life. So now the whole day I'm surrounded by these young people. If I want to talk to somebody, they are the only option. So that's how it works in my life.
And so, speaking about this, and about teaching,
Yeah.
how did you come to the legacy project?
So Stuart Cameron is also a very important influence of mine. And in kidney medicine, at the time that I knew him, he was the best known and most charismatic European renal medicine person. And so he had an unusual way of interacting with others. It was very simple. He didn't listen to what other people said because it was so much less interesting than what he had to say. So he would have these monologues. He would come and present one of these monologues, sort of walk away as you started to talk, because whatever you had to say was just a very limited value. One day he started listening to me, and I was so astounded because I knew all these prominent people that he wasn't listening to, and he was listening to me. And so he and I were sitting on a bus at the International Congress in Kyoto, Japan, and there was a long ride from the airport. It was extremely boring. There were these huge noise barriers. There's nothing to see. And he started waxing poetic about how renal medicine is just exactly the right age to capture its living history, and we must do that. I was very inspired by this, and I immediately started, soliciting funds for him. I got back to him about it a few weeks later. And he said, "Kim, I'm so happy you're doing this, but I have to admit the following. I have no recollection whatsoever of that conversation in the bus. Absolutely none. I know this is an idea I have had, but I do not remember telling you about it. I'm so glad that despite that, I did tell you about it and that you started to work on it." So then we got 30,000 of seed funding from the Baxter company, and things started to happen. We started the interviews in 94, 95, and it then went on until 2007, and we did 45 official interviews, 50 in total, and then Stuart had always felt that the videotape we were recording on was a fugitive medium, that it was working for now, but it wouldn't work for very long, and if you stored it, you'd end up with all these tapes that were unreadable. And he was a pretty convincing guy, so I was sure that this was correct. So basically then, everything that we'd done was no longer accessible. Nobody had any access to it. There had been 3 interviews on the ISN site, but then they were not accessible. And so last year, 2018, I thought I would try and see if these stored tapes could be read, and they all could, every single one. Even after spending a hard Canadian -40 winter in my garage, they were all readable just like they had been when they were shot in 1994 or later. So that was a wonderful surprise that allowed us then to bring this project back to life, and then to add to it. I mean, it looks like consistent, coordinated activity, that exactly when the first interviews that we did were no longer accessible, then you folks in Europe started to do a whole new series, just as if we were all coordinating together. I don't really think that we were. It just accidentally happened that 2011 was when our stuff stopped being accessible at all. Nobody had any access to it. And it's when you then started creating this new content. And so now we have a great series of 135 YouTube videos between your efforts and ours, and it's just really, really nice. And you can think of many ways that it would not have happened at all. I mean, if you had to bet, you would say, those tapes aren't readable. No, indeed. You're just wasting your time trying to get anything from 15, 16-year-old tapes, but that proved not to be the case.
And why do you think they are still?
Well, it is light. You know, we have all these phrases, philosophical phrases, praising the light, but the thing that threatens digital information is light. If you have a CD or DVD and you put it on the wall, anywhere where light can get at it, within about 10 years, there isn't anything readable on that disc.
No, but I was asking you something different. Why do you think people would be interested in listening to that today?
Well, because one's history is a part of what one is. That's true for individuals, it's true for societies, it's true for groups of people. So for nephrology to have an identity, it needs to know where it came from, who founded it, what were the various components that came together, and then how did it develop in the early years. That is what is captured in these 135 videos, so I don't think it will ever end. I mean, one proof that it's worth doing is that I think we will keep on doing it, like what we're doing right now. I don't believe this effort will ever end. I think we will keep on documenting progress in kidney medicine, and more and more people will realize the value of that now we've brought this back to life. But ironically, in one of the last ISN council meetings that I attended, I attended the meetings through 2007, but in 2006, the president-elect suggested that we put all this material on YouTube, which is exactly what we have now done. So in a way, that was a foreshadowing of the end result here, where it's all freely accessible on YouTube. And there you can do analytics. So what I thought in the beginning, and I was so wrong, is one needs just an ordinary index of a video. That's a great thing to have. That's absolutely wrong. If you do what looks like a comprehensive index of a video, people read the index so they don't watch the video because it'll save them enormous time, right? So what you really need is to do audience retention stats and see where the peaks are, and then see exactly what's being said at each of those audience retention peaks where people go back and watch something over and over again, and create a sort of mysterious set of these phrases and things being said at the audience retention peaks. And that is intriguing enough that people will go in and watch the video more than they otherwise would. It gives you some clue to where content is, but does not dissuade people from watching the video the way an ordinary index does. And it took me a long time to realize that. And it's amazing how many audience retention peaks there are. So this human behavior of going back to rewatch things is a real phenomenon. And YouTube is a very good way to see that. Some of the audience retention peaks are huge. Like, there can be a certain point where there are 40 or 50 times the number of people watching that particular segment than any other part because somebody's promoted it. Oh, watch what's at minute 14.
And what is your favorite of these videos, if you have
What?
one? Which one is your favorite?
My favorite video, I think, is going to be Jean-Daniel Schrar when I have the English translation, because he is the person that I knew the best, and he looks so good in that 2014 video, but I don't actually know what it says because I don't speak French. So the ones that I understand, I think Donald Selden, I'm very fond of that. It's been very popular, and he was a real role model for many people. And then for personal reasons, I like Robert Heptinstall's video, Stuart Cameron. There are now 3 for him, but yeah. So I like videos of the people who influenced me, but Selden was never in that category. But still, I like his very much. Kolf is sort of interesting too. Kolf was interviewed when he was actively working, and so my son edited the video. There were all these door slams. Kolf was so proud of still working in his 90s, and the door was slamming and slamming. So all these video edits to take out the door slams. But that is also really cool, how mentally active and physically active he was at that advanced age. And then Homer Smith, the earliest video that we have from the 1950s, it's so mysterious. It was sent to me in the mail. I no longer have the cover letter. I don't know exactly who it came from, but it's so cool because it's the only one that was intended to be comical. So it's the humor of the 1950s, or medical humor of the 1950s, such as it was. And Homer Smith had a reputation of being sort of dour and serious. The only video that he made that we can watch today is a basically humorous video of just a series of jokes based on his life and work life. And that is also really, really cool and really, really surprising.
And you told me that you write poetry.
Yes?
So one of the questions, I will ask you one of the questions that I've asked all the pioneers, that is, do you think there is poetry in our profession, and where is it?
Oh, certainly there is. I think poetry is an expression of human aspiration, human emotion, and there's so much of aspiring and emotions in medicine of all different sorts. At the poetry sessions every Tuesday evening, I am a regular there. I provide sort of the infrastructure, lighting, the video, and so on in the best poetry session in Edmonton. Every poem I recite there is related to my work. It's related to kidney medicine or to the course on technology and the future of medicine. And that works. It's enough of a break for the other people who are all talking about love and loss and all the usual things that people write poetry about, self analysis, and empowerment and so on. And one of the most remarkable things, you might say, well, but this has nothing to do with the rest of your life. So a young woman appeared there, Antigone Oreopoulos, who is Demetrios Oreopoulos' daughter, the first offspring of a video legacy person that I've ever met, who I met in a poetry session in Edmonton. Who knew that this would happen? And then I met a second person too. So Heather Halperin, the granddaughter of Mitch Halperin, is one of our medical students. So I've become quite intrigued now with these family aspects of video legacy and the fact that some of these people have direct Edmonton connections, despite the fact that Edmonton is the only major Canadian city off the U.S. map. It kind of, in the minds of a lot of people, doesn't exist because every other major Canadian city is on the U.S. map. And yet we have significant ties to many of the significant figures in kidney medicine. It just came as an enormous surprise to me.
And speaking also, speaking about legacy and heritage, what would you advise a young person who wants to become a physician? I don't want you to cook
Yeah.
half done.
Well, I think that medicine is a wonderful choice of a career with intrinsic rewards. Like I can think of when my children were little and I would come home excited about work stuff. And they knew that somehow their father was involved in earthquakes, that I ran a worldwide disaster relief task force for many years. No renal clinician could be found to do this. They thought it would be a career killer. It had nothing to do with what their bosses wanted them to do. So before Norbert Lemire took that over, I ran it. So I'd come home all excited about work stuff. And my kids would say, "Is this about earthquakes again?" But they knew a lot about earthquakes. And really that's what I've found my whole working life, that a lot of what I do that I'm excited about, the general public can easily understand this. And so it sounds like some esoteric thing where they can't possibly figure out why anybody would pay me to do whatever it is that I do. They can readily understand the value. You would like to have a job that is not only fun and rewarding, but where you're not constantly seeking your boss's praise, that it's so obvious to you that what you're doing is valuable, you're helping people, you're making people who have gone through something difficult smile and feel hope again. And so medicine is a career where you can easily do that, and you can make it your own. You can create exactly the kind of configuration of your job that is best for you. And it is not the case that frequently physicians paint themselves into a corner and they end up in this rigid box. I think to some extent they end up in a rigid box. They're not creative enough in their own thinking about what kind of work they would like. I think the possibility of being able to enjoy all of every day because your work is so much fun, and then the time after work is also fun, that is more of a reality in medicine than maybe any other field. Maybe that's a long answer, but that's my answer about young people and medicine.
And what about nephrology?
So nephrology is the moonshot for regenerative medicine. We will reach a point where we are able to make kidneys from stem cells, from previous decellularized scaffolds and things like that. And then we'll have kidneys for everyone. And that will change things entirely, where we no longer have the shortages that we have now. And we have a world where if somebody needs renal replacement therapy, that will always be possible, and will always be possible to have an organ. And that will really change everything. And so when that occurs, and it's not that far from now, renal medicine will come back to what it once was, which is the most exciting field of medicine, where the best and the brightest and the most creative people wanted to be in that field, and the coolest people were in that field. It was like that at one time, and it will be like that again. We're just going. It's kind of like the Gartner hype curve. There are peaks and valleys and so on, and so it will come back to once again being one of the premier fields of medicine.
And I guess I know the answer, but you do it again?
Oh yes. No, I don't regret anything, nothing at all. I think you can think of the kind of visionary approach to the future that I have, and you say, well, what would have been different if I hadn't had that? Wouldn't it have made a lot of things more practical if I wasn't always thinking about the long-range future? But the things I enjoy most in my career have all come from that. The constant supply of new students wanting to work with me, the international collaboration I have with people all over the world, the huge presence in social media. I have a larger YouTube and Facebook presence than anybody you've ever met. I have over 1,000 videos on YouTube. So these things wouldn't have happened without that sort of futuristic vision. And really everything that I do now is related to the technology and future of medicine course, and that includes the poetry, the music. We have a poetry and music spin-off called The Future and All That Jazz, between terms, where we take unpopular subjects that everybody in the world needs to know about but would not sit still for a lecture on, and insert those subjects in poetry and music and kind of trick people into learning the same things in a fun evening of poetry and music, and that works very well.
So you are a happy person.
I am a happy person, yeah. And I think it's not just me. I think that other people pursuing the things that I have pursued would naturally be inclined toward being happy too. That's my feeling. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Good.
I will stop with happiness.
Yeah.
But just stay there a few minutes that I take some pictures.
Okay.
I can free you now, I think. So just, yeah. This camera doesn't do at the same time the portraits and
Yeah.
so I will torture you a few more seconds.
That's okay. Yeah, my camcorder takes automatic stills, and it's so cool. It's sort of a test of how successful the social interaction is because it's looking for like symmetrical hand gestures and high cheekbones and symmetrical smiles and that sort of thing. So if the personal interaction is really lousy, you may not get any automatic pictures. And if it's really good, then you may get 400, 500 an hour. So it gives you lots to choose from.
No, I actually have to say that I prefer all what is manual.
You prefer human taken pictures rather than automatic, but it does capture some moments. We have one with a guy having his hands over his head like this, and he kept that pose for only a second, and the computer captured it so perfectly. So it can capture things that a human photographer has great difficulty with.
We can do it in the post-production phase.
Yeah.
Some of them are good.
Sure.
This one I like.
Yeah.
And this is my favorite one.
I'll send you Oscar Zian, whose picture I was talking about. He's a very, very good-looking guy. So you see, when you compare him and me in that pose, he's way better.
It's a good camera. It's the first time.
Yeah.
It's the first time I'm using it.
Yeah, cool.
I find it, I would say, satisfactory.
So tell me, when would I be able to see something from this?
I have to. Depends upon maybe after 1st of May, because I will see my friends, because downloading all this stuff takes a lot of time, and passing it through the web is not so easy.
Right.
Before having mounted it, but we see each other in Italy the 1st of May.